Welcome to the No Sugarcoating podcast. I am Amber Romaniuk, emotional eating, digestive, and hormone expert. I am also the founder of amberapproved.ca. I support professional women achieve optimal health through mindful eating, self-care, and overcoming self-sabotage with food. This podcast provides the honest truth on what you really need to create body freedom. The No Sugarcoating podcast provides information on healthy living, lifestyle changes, nutrition, and diet, and is intended for informational purposes only. Always seek the advice of your healthcare practitioner regarding your health and nutrition program. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 201 of the No Sugarcoating podcast. Today, I'm so grateful to be joined by my guest, Taylor Nolan, and we're going to be talking about addiction, self-worth and body image, social media and body shaming, and why self-care plays a vital role when it comes to self-love. So I am going to take some time to introduce my lovely guest. Taylor Nolan is best known from ABC's The Bachelor and Bachelor in Paradise, but is ultimately focused on spreading awareness on taboo topics like mental health that people typically have a hard time talking about. Taylor received her master's in clinical mental health counseling from Johns Hopkins University and practices as a licensed mental health counselor in Washington State. She also has a podcast, Let's Talk About It, which aims to reduce stigma on topics that make us feel uncomfortable, as those are usually the most important topics to discuss. Each episode serves as an example for listeners on how to lean in on these taboo topics and have conversations that are authentic, lead to deeper understanding and connection, and that they can have a positive impact in everyday life. Let's Talk About It has been growing since December 2017 and has maintained a 4.5-star rating on iTunes. She continues conversations from her podcast to her Instagram, where she is open and authentic with her followers on topics ranging from how to live a sober lifestyle to reducing stigma around female masturbation. When Taylor isn't recording episodes for Let's Talk About It or seeing clients, she is working in her garden, rollerblading, hanging out with her cat, or traveling. Taylor is a total plant and farm nerd and is passionate about living a plant-based sustainable diet. She is also an unapologetic, crazy cat lady who has rescued and fostered over 50 cats and kittens while living in Baltimore and is a major advocate of the hashtag Adopt Don't Shop. So without further ado, welcome Taylor to the podcast. So welcome Taylor. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me and for being on my podcast too.
And thank you for having me on your podcast. It was so much fun. So it's, of course, always amazing to return the favor. So what I first wanted to ask you is, I know you're in mental health, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about what inspired you to take that path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, first I, started my journey into mental health, I would say first starting in high school. I took a AP Psych class, and it was hands down my favorite course I had ever taken in high school. And it just felt like all these things made sense. And this felt like, this was so important to society. Like, of all the things I'm learning, like, this makes the most sense that we should understand this information. And then I had kind of decided from there that I wanted to pursue a bachelor in psychology. And, throughout that, I did a lot of reflecting on why is this something that I'm pulled to? And, there's been so much, if I looked back, that, in middle school, even the friends that I had, I was drawn to these people who really had like layers and layers of pain and trauma, and even likely things like bipolar disorder that, at the time I didn't know, but all these things that just kind of made sense. And I'd watch these people and definitely going down a route of substance abuse. And later on, knowing those dear friends who passed away from overdoses, in their early 20s from drug abuse, and of just thinking of myself back then and seeing, even when I first started experimenting with drugs and alcohol, I was still like such a goody two shoes in that. I was like, I don't know about this. And a large part of that had to do with the fact that, a lot of my family, a lot of my extended family members struggled with substance abuse, where there was very heavy addiction to smoking. There was huge addiction to alcohol and a history of people dying from cirrhosis of the liver and all these things. And just kind of getting into that education piece of it, I just felt like so many, not all, but a few of these things could be very avoidable and preventable, and of wanting to be the helper in that and feeling like, my, Uncle Greg didn't have to die of cancer from cigarettes. Like, why couldn't he just stop smoking?
Yeah.
Uncle Warren didn't have to die of cirrhosis. Like, why did he keep drinking when the doctors told him that if he keeps drinking, he's going to die? And asking myself these questions and wanting to be the helper in that. And from those things, also seeing how that impacts everyone else's mental health and the family and the communication dynamics. And that side of my family is Italian. And so it's like, we really don't talk about anything. And when we do, it's just like people are upset and there's resentment and grudges and all these things. So I think just getting into the schooling of it, it made so much sense to me to, look at these things and just see okay, how can I help with these issues?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a long answer.
No, but it's great. Amber Approved offers private coaching for hormonal imbalances, weight loss and digestive issues, emotional eating, and more. Contact Amber at amberapproved.ca to book your 30-minute complimentary consultation today. And I love that obviously it's not ideal to have had the personal experience you have, but I think it's always inspiring and it helps you relate and understand. And so I think, like you've said, cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, food, there is this epidemic of addiction and mental health struggles that fuel people to use different substances or overspend money or whatever it is to numb or to cope with their emotions. And so, being that you had family members who had struggled with this, did you have any worry of that it would really rub off on you and have a serious impact on your interaction with drugs or alcohol or anything like that because of the family history?
Yeah. So I think when I first started experimenting with everything, I didn't even think about it. I don't think that it was in the forefront of my head. It could have been something unconsciously that was kind of on the back burner in my head. But, even when I was with my friends and, we would take shots of tequila and shots of vodka, I hated it. I hated the taste of it. And I just felt I didn't like how this made me feel. I didn't like feeling out of control like that. Watching my friends get in really bad situations because they were so drunk was scary to me. I enjoyed smoking weed much more than I did drinking. But even that, it just scared me, that loss of control. And I think as I got older, that it was literally maybe a year's period that I would take these little baby shots. And that was all I did drinking wise. And I haven't really drank at all since then, and I think as I've grown older, I am more aware of the fact that, if I were to do it now, that very well could be a slippery slope. And, I look at many people in my family, and given that there is a history of addiction, I think there's also many people that I know and they know struggle with just the abuse of it, that they may not be addicted, but they do abuse things like alcohol. And for me, it's been a conscious decision to be how can I challenge myself to still do these things that people feel they need alcohol or drugs to get through. If I need to have the liquid courage to go up to someone at a bar or something like that, it's how can I find that place within myself to do that and feel even more empowered and feel even stronger that I didn't need anything else to do this. I did this all on my own. And I think that kind of determination came in there. And even throughout my schooling with my bachelor's and then going on to my master's as well, a lot of the internship and practicum work that I did was with people with substance abuse rehabilitation. And So yeah, I think there have been so many like deterrents for me to wanting to like engage in that. And just even with my schooling and being like, okay, how can I deal with life when it gets hard in a way that will be not self-destructive?
Yeah. And I think that's a huge question for so many people, because everyone goes through some form of difficult times, experiences. I feel like in society, we're taught to not feel, don't cry, don't get upset, just be happy or like be strong. And so in essence, we're these human beings that have these feelings and emotions, and we're told to shut down. And so we're suppressing that, not only by holding it in but then by, I can't feel this. I don't want to feel this. I don't know how to feel this. And then again, we're using, whatever it is to suppress and numb that even more. And so for people who maybe they have a family history of addiction like you, and I know I came from a family history. I have 4 generations on my mom's side of food addiction and a lack mindset. On my father's side, a bit of alcohol abuse. I didn't realize though, until I was deep in my food addiction, how much I had inherited from them and it had carried on within me. So for people who have that history and they know that they have, some family connection, and maybe they're worried and they're going, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to become an alcoholic. I don't want to become addicted to food. And, or maybe they're already going down that slope. Like, what do you think are some like just basic preventative recommendations or things for them to think about to help them with that, aside of course from going and getting support?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is to think about your intention, is to take like a very conscious choice to ask yourself what your intention is. And I actually did earlier on in my podcast, Let's Talk About It with Taylor Nolan, I did an episode where I actually invited my mom on to talk about like alcohol abuse. She did the dry January thing, and like I have a lot of issues with that on its own, but where she reflected a lot on her drinking habits. And she, decided that after this dry January thing that she was going to be very intentional in her drinking going forward. And, I don't know how effective that's been, but I do think that for people who want to take more control over their health, the relationship with alcohol or drugs, I think to be very intentional and ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to further enjoy my meal? Am I doing this because I feel hurt right now and I just don't want to freaking think about it anymore? Am I doing this because, I feel awkward because this person just offered me a drink, but I didn't really want to actually drink, but now I feel like I need to drink? And to just ask yourself the question of why do I want this right now? And I think also, again, it still is intention, but it's just an extension of that. Being very aware of who you are surrounding yourself with. So being intentional about your social support and where you're socializing and who you're socializing with, and what times of day and evening you're going to be socializing. I think, one of the biggest things in addiction recovery is new people, places, and things. Because when you get into that abusive or addictive place, that those people, places, and things are all playing a huge part in what's allowing you to be in that position, and in some ways encouraging you and perpetuating it. So I think doing things like being intentional about who you surround yourself with and where you're socializing can be really helpful to make sure that you're being intentional about not going down that path and protecting yourself. And I think something that's super important that, I've had to actually recently educate a girlfriend on is that I think part of why addiction can be so scary is because this notion that it is a cycle and that it can run in families, and of feeling like, why can't this person just be totally fine? Or like they were totally fine. And then why did this have to start in their life?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that like, you can be totally fine. You can have a totally healthy relationship with drugs or alcohol or food or whatever. And you could have a major significant life event happen, a traumatic event, something major in your life that can literally flip a switch inside of you to where that gene, that makeup now is awakened to where that addictive part of you can come to life. And I think in those situations, if that is when you go towards alcohol and towards drugs, thinking that you have the same relationship with them, that's when I think it gets to a super slippery slope, because people don't realize then that like, that's the situation where, you know, calling a friend, going to therapy, you know, whatever it is that you can do to cope, to help you process and to help you heal, writing, exercising, whatever it is that can help to deter from that little switch being turned all the way on.
Right.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with everything you're saying. And it's so interesting that you mentioned the gene, because I had done some testing a little while ago. And I think, you know, it's good to know your genetic makeup along with all these other pieces of your health. And when I had looked at the results, it said high risk for becoming addicted to cocaine. And I kind of laughed, because I was like, wow, like no wonder, again, this another piece of the puzzle of the food addiction and why I was so addicted to food, because I also had this other part of me that I didn't realize until a few weeks ago. And I honestly always say, like, thank God I wasn't addicted to drugs or alcohol, because I actually don't think I would still be here because of how severe the addiction and you are right. I think for a lot of people, it is a life-changing situation, whether it's a breakup or a move across the country, or maybe you lose your business and go bankrupt, and, or you lose a close family member or friend, or just, you know, whatever it is that ends up happening to you. You can think you have just everything, you know, that you know how to cope and that you know how to deal with life, but sometimes things can come up to surprise you. And I think that's where it's so important to know what is available for support and to learn how to cope in healthy ways, regardless of what you're using. Do you think that because drugs and alcohol can become so dangerous and so life-threatening, that food is kind of swept under the rug when it comes to food addiction, because it doesn't kill you as fast? Like, sure, you can get sick, you can have an illness happen because of, you know, being so destructive with your body with food. But do you think that there's less emphasis on like emotional eating, food addiction, and eating disorders because it's not as dangerous short term as drugs and alcohol?
Totally. And I think in addition to it not being as dangerous as drugs and alcohol as quickly, I think it's also partially because food is literally something we require to live. You know, we don't require alcohol to live. We don't require cocaine or heroin or weed or any drug to survive. I mean, I guess I somewhat take that back, because weed can be like very like medicinal, and some people literally do need that to live. But from a basic, just like health standpoint, you don't need drugs or alcohol to live. Whereas with food, I know that is something that we literally all need to survive. And so I think that's a part of it. I think it's also a part of it that with how commercialized self-care has become, that treating yourself, and, you know, in the States, and I guess probably all of North America, there is this just culture of like abundance. And like, if you have that abundance, then like you're healthy and like you are successful if you can have that abundance. And so there's just these different layers of like, you know, you had a hard day, like eat that pint of ice cream, and like, you know, oh, your boyfriend broke up with you, like we're going to go, you know, eat a whole cake and get wasted. Like, I don't know. There's all these different things. And then even just knowing that you can have a full fridge and you can have a totally full pantry, that you're successful, and that feels good for you, because it's like, like I've got these things. And so I think a few different layers of things contribute to like food not always being looked at as something as dangerous as things like drugs and alcohol addiction, but it is very real, and it can turn on very similar, if not the same kind of brain activity as drugs and alcohol can. So.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you shared that, because I've seen more lately ads actually making jokes about emotional eating, or like there's been a couple of shows that I've watched, and the actor is, almost making it seem light and like it's not a big deal. And then I'm thinking, well, what is society then thinking? Like, oh, well, it's okay since like this person acted about it and did it. So I guess like I'm just going to be okay with it. And so, when we're watching TV or we're on Instagram looking at a public figure or a celebrity and they're kind of making fun of it or making light of it, how should someone who's vulnerable to, and or struggling with emotional eating, like what are some things maybe they can do to not, I guess, get sucked into this person who, just because they have a lot of followers, likes, or credibility, doesn't that what they're saying or doing is in alignment with what you need?
Yeah. I think it's really hard because I think the first step in even being able to not be susceptible to it is to even be aware of what it is. Like I think a lot of people would look at, perhaps that show that you just watched and be like, oh yeah. And just be like, that's normal. And be like, yeah, like I agree. So I think that first it takes being just aware that that's not the best way to cope, and that is actually like perpetuating very dangerous behavior. I think when it comes to, people sharing things on social media, I think, again, I'm going to be like so repetitive, but of intention, of like being so intentional about the people that you're allowing in your life, or they are inspiring you, or you are learning from them. I think there's a lot of things that get shared on social media that perhaps are false images or are highlight reels that can make it difficult to actually sort through to really understand what the real message is and who that person actually is. And I think, even I get tripped up sometimes of like, people want me to share my workout routine. People want me to share my eating habits. And, I get very worried of like, oh, if I share that I'm eating this thing, but I didn't share every single other thing that I ate today, that people are going to assume, that they're going to have some kind of assumption about the fact that I'm eating this. And I think it's like, you really have to take things with a grain of salt, and you have to zoom out and have perspective that like, just because this person, dear God, if they share a flat tummy tea, unfollow them. But, if they're sharing things like that are like, I detox every month and blah, 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 that like, zoom out here, because there's probably a lot of other things actually happening that person is doing that they're not sharing. And I guess just also educating yourself to be like, is that something that would actually be beneficial for me? Is that something that do I trust their opinion? Do I trust their life choices even? Like, I don't know. There's a lot there for sure.
I agree with you. The No Sugarcoating podcast is proud to partner with Herbaland. Herbaland products are sugar-free, gluten-free, vegan, and made with love in Richmond, British Columbia. All of their vitamins and supplements come in gummy form, making them easy and fun to take. Their products are made for everyone to enjoy. Whether you are struggling with capsule fatigue, have trouble swallowing large capsules, or you simply love your vitamins tasting like delicious watermelon, Herbaland is for you. And a fun fact is that Herbaland is also the #1 gummy manufacturer in Canada. Be sure to check out more information and try your gummies at www.herbaland.ca. And I think what ends up happening is, especially for the female population in North America, we get caught up in all these images we see on social media, TV, magazines, and then it's like, oh, I want to look like that. How did they do that? And then here comes all the dieting, the quick fixes, the extreme eating styles. And of course, because those things are not sustainable, and often these women probably are insecure. They probably don't feel good enough. Hence why they want to look a certain way to, receive a certain amount of attention or whatever it is. So, when women are struggling with low self-worth and we have all this pressure, and then there's all these diets, and of course the diet industry is $1 trillion industry, body image is severely affected, and there's new things popping up like selfie dysmorphia and, different things with social media. So, when we look at social media, when you say you were a person who was feeling insecure and you went on someone's account and you saw an image of them and they were in a bikini or they just had like a fit looking body or a curvy body, whatever that resonates to the listener, because I know you and I had talked about this, because there is almost this shame that is put on women who have what maybe society portrays as a more like petite or thin fit looking body. And then, people are messaging and going, your posts are triggering me. Like, you shouldn't post that. I'm going to unfollow you. Or they're getting like negative comments and like put down and judged.
Yeah.
So when does it become the person who's reacting to the image? When does it become their responsibility to build awareness that perhaps there is some work for them to do on their self-worth versus projecting their reaction, which is perhaps part of like jealousy, upset, comparison to that person on social media?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first I'd say like you hit the nail right on the head. Like, I think it is a lot of projection, and often the times that we shame and judge other people are actually coming from a place within ourselves that we're shaming and judging ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think once you actually do some of that work of like self-love and self-acceptance, which I don't always like saying, sometimes it like can sound so like woo-woo-y, and it's just like it sounds like this is beautiful, like easy, like just love yourself. And it's a lot more than that. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience. But I think once you can get to that place of just like accepting yourself for where you're at and being kind to yourself in that and compassionate, that then when you do see someone else that looks different than you, that you do find beautiful, that it's just, oh wow, like they look really beautiful. But that doesn't take away from you. That doesn't change anything about you. You're just then able to actually like notice someone else's beauty. And that doesn't mean that they're this petite figure and whatever else. Like, it's just the fact that this person is who they are, and that they are confident in that, or they are accepting of that, or whatever the case is. And I do think, there's certainly on both ends of it. And I always say that like two things can be opposite and true at the same time. And I think it can be hard to talk about things like this because people can get upset of talking about, oh, like poor the skinny girl that gets shamed, like tough shit. Like, well, you're not this, and that, and you don't have to deal with this, and that. And I think that both of those things can be true, that like, someone who struggles with being curvy and feeling confident in that and feeling like society tells them that that's not beautiful, that they can feel hurt and shame. And then it can also be true that someone who holds perhaps a more societally accepting standard of beauty and skinny can also receive shame and feel those things too. And to really just like take a step back and not have to compare them. And not have to say like, well, this one's more and this one's less and blah, 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 but just letting them both hold true. And I think, it's a tough thing to talk about.
It is.
For that reason.
But I think it just goes to show how, like with the evolution of the internet and social media, I think society's become so much more judgmental because now we're spending so much time on our phones and apps looking at pictures, and it's like, oh, look at that person. Oh, must be nice. Like whatever it is, whether they have money, they have success, the body, whatever it is. And if we haven't done our own work, then going on social media or online can just be such a slippery slope. And I think it's a stat of about 60% of people who go on social media leave social media feeling worse about themselves. And I think it's just profound. And it goes to show you how much of society struggles with insecurity and self-worth. And I'd be curious to know how much that increased after the age of the internet and social media came along. Because it's huge. And
I will share too, like, I don't frequently share photos like in bathing suits or necessarily of my body, but it's so interesting the messages that I do receive when I do. And honestly, there are times that like I share a picture and I'm just like, like I happen to be in a bathing suit, but like I was so happy doing this, or like I was having a lot of fun. It's like, I wanted to share it. And then afterwards, where I will literally feel like, oh, fuck, like this is bad. Like my body's like bad. Like it's bad that I shared this because now other people feel bad or other people are trying to make me feel bad for sharing it. That it's like, you know, I think it's so strange. Like people, I'll post a photo and I'll have, you know, bathing suit or whatever. And people will want me to specifically like call out the fact that my body is in the post, like in my caption, and be like, you're only posting this because you want people to look at your body. And like, you were just fishing for compliments because of that. And it's like, there's just so much of this judgment that just gets thrown at you of like, well, I liked the photo and my body happened to be in it. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. And of people, I mean, this is a whole other layer, but you know, having the background that I have of being a therapist, that people feel like it's so unprofessional of me to show my body like that. And, you know, I've had conversations with my friends where they've even posed the question of like, you know, do you think that if you were more curvy, that people would still make the same judgment about you being a therapist, that they would still say that that's inappropriate and unprofessional of you. If you didn't have, you know, petite figure or whatever. And I don't know, it's an interesting thought. And I think it's almost this weird thing of like, I almost like don't want to share some of those things. And it does feel like it's not helpful. You know, I try to make sure that like anything I post like will be helpful in some way, whether it's like something positive or something reflective or social justice related or something. But it does put it in perspective of feeling like, okay, like it just causes like too much. Like, and then I feel like weird about my body. And like, I'm just trying to be like, this is just me and my body is just a part of it. And perhaps I lack some of the awareness there because I haven't had like deep hatred for my body itself. Like I've experienced self-hatred in other ways, but I haven't, you know, necessarily been like skinny shamed until, you know, the following that I have and with posting things like my bathing suit photos and stuff on Instagram, where then that's kind of the first time that I've really been like, oh, okay, this is a problem. Like the way my body is a problem.
And that's, I think, where again, there's a breakdown with society is you should be able to live your life the way you want, and you should be able to share what you want on social media and not get attacked or judged or put down so much because of the way your body is, regardless of what it looks like. I mean, we see all different shapes and sizes and colors of women sharing their bodies in different ways on social media, getting paid for it, and or like I've seen other, you know, professional female women on social media posting photos in bikinis, and they're very successful and you know, are getting the clientele. So I really don't per se think that should be something that determines you as in your profession and as what you do. I mean, it would be potentially different if it was really distasteful, but I think it's so important for women to band together and support each other and to stop the judgment. But I think what it's going to take as per part of that is people wanting to go in and do their own work, because I really think, again, it's the ego, the self-sabotaging mindset, the insecurity that's your photo is okay, but it's triggering people and then they're projecting, and whomever's account it is, not even specifically just yours. You know, and whether it's for the way that you look or claiming a certain kind of expertise, you know, I don't think you should be judged because you're sharing with the world.
And it's really interesting though, like, as you say, you know, women of different like shapes, sizes, colors, all of that. And I think something I've also discussed with my friends too is like, I'm biracial, I'm half black, half white. And there will be times that I'll share a photo and literally another influencer friend of mine who is a blonde white woman, works as a nurse. She will share almost an even more like just a straight up booty shot. And when you compare the comments, it is like, it's so disheartening. Where literally all of her comments are like so empowering, and it's the same follower base. It's the same population of people. That it's so empowering, and it's like, you go girl. And it's like, you look so good. And it's like, just all positive, all positive, not like, oh, like you're a nurse, like it's inappropriate, or like, oh, you just want people to look at your ass. Like it's none of those things. And you look at my comments, and it's shame about being therapist. It's shame about, being happy or confident enough to share my body like that. And I think there's layers to that around my profession, around my skin color, around, the shape of my body, I guess, even though we have similar, in that comparison, we have somewhat similar body types aside from our color and height, and her boobs are larger than mine. But, we do have, it's the same society. It's the same image of what I think society would be like. Stereotypically, that's beautiful. But I think there's like this over sexualization for women of color that like my body is perhaps even more sexualized than her body, just for the sheer fact of like the color of it, that people almost unconsciously view it in a different way. And I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and maybe that's a separate conversation, but it is interesting just to compare those two and see how totally different. I mean, these were literally like days apart, and I didn't even notice it. Like a friend of mine was like, oh, do you see this? Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. So then my next question has two parts. First part, do you think society has become too sensitive, and now having like all these platforms where they can just kind of like let it all out and not take responsibility? And then the second part is, for women who are feeling like they can't live their lives and be themselves and share themselves the way they want to authentically on social media, what are maybe some things that, you can do to feel safe enough to do so?
So first part, I would say that I feel like I have to be so careful about how I word this. And even as I think through it, I'm like, I'm not totally sure. So I'm just going to talk through it. I think in some ways there is a heightened sensitivity to these things. And I think we have moved in more of a direction of empowering women who are curvy and who struggle with weight, and have embraced this body positivity type of movement in the last several years. And I think that's a very positive thing. And I think it's good that we're moving in that direction. However, when we start to move in that direction, I think it becomes, people start to look at it in like an all or nothing type of way. And going back to what I said of holding those two things at the same time, that as we move towards this like body positivity, body acceptance place, that we have then also looked at those women who perhaps either, work very hard to have a slim body, or who just are naturally thinner as negative. And again, of not comparing, of like the shame and the judgment and the difficulties of these things, but allowing them both to be true at the same time, I don't think happens a lot. And I think it just has moved towards more this sense of like, and I want to, like, in my head, I'm trying to compare this to like, oh, well, this is like people kind of saying like post me too, like, oh, like poor men, like dealing with this, and it's like, I think both can be true, like, I think, yes, the experiences that women are having, we should empathize with and believe is true and validate. And those are really terrible. And there's almost this like immediate emotional reaction to want to like shut up the men's side of it and, the skinny girl side of it, right? Of like, no, like this doesn't get to be true because like, look at all this other stuff. But I think it is important to hold both of those things and to say, yeah, okay, let me also empathize with you and let me hear, and like where you're at is valid too.
I love that. I think that's really good. And I know even answering that question is very sensitive. So thank you for answering it. And I agree. I think it's important to emphasize. At the same token, I think if someone is always in negative self-talk, they hate their body, they are like thriving off of, saying negative things to other people or spending hours on social media, posting negative comments. Like, I really think there's a great opportunity for that person, if they're ready and willing, to go, you know what, I would love to actually heal this and overcome this and do what I need to do for myself, because none of these people have interfered truly with my body, right? It's like emotional eating. Like, no one can force you to put the food in your mouth but you. Yet we're blaming all these people. Like, I used to blame everybody, like, oh, it's because I had a bad day at work and like my bosses were like mean and like mean women, and they didn't like me because I was fat, or like, oh man, like my friend really upset me today and it's their fault that I binged and completely self-sabotaged. And I had to get to this point where I was like, it's not anyone else's fault but mine. I'm not going to like get angry at myself because I didn't realize this until now, but I need to take responsibility for how other people are making me feel, and I need to learn how to work through it. Right? Whether it is like a friend, a coworker, a boss, a family member, or someone on social media. I think regardless of where the trigger is coming from to make us want to project or react, it's so important, like you said earlier, to take a step back and take some time to reflect upon the situation and how you feel. And like you said, writing is a great way to do that. Calling a friend, having, somebody to talk to. So then my second part, of course, was just about, if women are feeling vulnerable or feeling like they can't express themselves or be themselves, especially on social media, what kind of words of encouragement would you have for them?
Yeah. Well, first, I would say, and this is something that I've seen recently a few times, just this notion that like you can still be confident and feel good with your body and not share it. That body positivity does not always mean that you have to be, here's my body, everybody, this is my body. And I think that that's, in a way, I feel like that feels nice. I feel like that feels comfortable. That pressure isn't necessarily needed. And I think just even thinking about like seeing that meme like has thrown me off of what specifically the question was, of how women who are feeling in a more sensitive place can navigate.
How they can feel like they fully feel free to express themselves as they want to authentically on social media versus fearing the judgment, the comments.
Yes. Okay. Oh yeah. It can definitely be hard because the fear of all of that is so real, especially in a place like Instagram. So for people that are fearful of that, I feel you. And like that for me plays a huge part in like almost every post I do, because for me, it's so important that what I do put out there is not a highlight reel. And I would encourage every person on social media to be consciously aware and intentionally not create a highlight reel, because I think it morphs your own sense of your life. It morphs our societal like expectations and standards of life. And I think when we can show up in a place that feels and that is very authentic, that yes, you can still receive that shame and that judgment, but when you feel good just being you and you feel like this was as authentic as I could have made it be, that those other judgments, like those, like, who cares? Like, that's about you. That's not about me, because I thought long and hard about this and I've done a lot of work on this. And so I know that this is true, that this is me, that this is real. When you try so hard, like the times that I do try to, craft a really punny caption and, try to make sure that like my pose is perfect and all these things, like, then I get that anxiety and I get like wrapped up in that, like, is someone going to notice this? Is someone going to notice that? Like, what are they going to say? And when I take all of that away, then I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, yeah, someone could point out, oh, I like your hair so much better when it's straight. And it's just like, it's like, okay, yeah, that's your opinion.
Yeah.
Like I intentionally chose to be this way and to share it this way. And that was so authentic for me. And I'm okay with that. And I think that I know that that's a hard place to go to. And I know it's not a place that you can like get to just like overnight. So I think another thing that people can do just to feel more comfortable expressing themselves in spite of that fear of judgment is to start practicing that outside of social media. Honestly, to practice showing up as yourself with your friends and your relationships with your family and just with yourself first. Like, I think, writing down like what your truths are, like owning your story and being like, yeah, I struggled with food addiction or I struggled with alcohol addiction. And, I was in an abusive relationship and, I lost my cat, my friend, whatever. I experienced all these things and, I am still this, and that, I am resilient. I am strong. I am worthy. I am valuable. Of getting to a place of recognizing those things in yourself in your real life will, I think, help you ultimately to show up authentically in all the areas, and work and relationships and social media. And it's not easy. It is a lot of work. And so I for sure recommend therapy for everyone to try to have some extra support and in navigating those things, because either way, the judgment and the shame is a possibility no matter what. Like that's the risk that you take when you are vulnerable and when you do show up. And I remember even going on The Bachelor. I think it was my producer that told me this, and something we talked about a lot, which was, you're going to be recorded for 24 hours a day for however long you're here. And if you are trying to, and like, who knows what parts of that are actually going to get shown. Yeah. And if you are trying so hard to be something that you're not, it's going to show, and you're going to look back at that and you're going to feel so stupid and you're going to regret it. And you're going to feel like, oh my God, like who is that person? Like, that's not me. And so in all of those moments, like to show up as yourself, because at the end of the day, when I looked at it, it was like, okay, yeah, I could try to be this. I could try to be that. And either way, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter how you are, someone anywhere could find something wrong with it. So would you rather it be like this, fake thing that you're just trying to do to please someone else and then get met with that rejection? Or would you rather be like, no, like that's 100% me. And like, you don't have to like that. And like, that's okay that you don't like that, but this is where I'm at. And like, this is me. I think can be a really helpful place to be at.
I love that. And I love that you reflected and thought, no, I need to just go and be myself if I do this, because, and you already answered part of my question, but it was really about, by being on the show, did it change the relationship you had with your body? Because I mean, you have however many millions of people watching you, right? You have all these other women in this space with you. So it's just kind of like, how did that have any impact on you?
I think the impact that the show had on how I feel about my body was much less than the impact on how I feel about myself personally and professionally. But I will say, I think for a lot of girls, just being in that environment triggers a lot of insecurities. There's a hell of a lot of comparison that happens, especially body wise. girls discussing different kinds of plastic surgery and, Botox and boob jobs, and all kinds of different things to figure out kind of how they can feel more confident with themselves, figure out how they can be more attractive to society, to figure out whatever it is, changing something about where they're at. And I think a lot of women struggle with that in general. And I think to then be in that kind of environment only exacerbates it, because not only are you in this place that has this tone of competition around it, but then it's also judged nationally and people will pick you apart. I mean, my dear friend Vanessa from the show, who ended up engaged to the person, from night one, she was like judged as being like way too curvy and that she was like the fat girl and all this. And it was just like, it's so nasty. And I think for me, I do acknowledge as we talk about all this stuff, like, I hope someone doesn't think I don't know this, but like, I do acknowledge like the privilege that I do have in society. Like, yes, I can hold both of these things being difficult at the same time. But I do also acknowledge that I do have privilege of being someone who is skinny and who does fit that societal standard. And which hopefully in that same example that I share of, like me too with a guy, that he can also acknowledge like the privileges that he has as a man, whatever. I think that's like a responsible step to take in this conversation, to where, I didn't necessarily go into that experience with some of the same insecurities that the other women might have had or were then created from that environment. I got, when I walked down the steps day one of Paradise, I had these shorts on, and mind you, it's like a beach in Mexico, right? And people are like in their bathing suits and all this stuff. And I come down the steps and like I have these shorts and I have like a bathing suit on underneath my shorts, but they're like flowy and whatnot. And so like you can see like some of my butt cheeks in my shorts, and so many people had issues with my shorts and that like my ass was showing, and like, how I was such a slut, or how I was just like asking for attention, and how I just wanted people to look at my butt. And it's like, hello, we're walking onto a beach. Like, are you going to also shame the girls that are like wearing bathing suits on the beach? Like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
To where it, I think, just makes me, I don't even know. I think it's still something I'm unpacking and figuring out. Like, I acknowledge the privilege that I have with my body, but I also don't want to develop a sense of shame with my body because it's something that other people, I don't know.
I get what you mean. Yeah. And I don't think that women who have a certain or fit a certain body image should have to feel bad or take on shame or self-hate because of judgment they're getting from other women. And as you've just shared, and one of the things I'm hoping that the audience hears is that, it's not just like rainbows and sunshines for somebody who has had the privilege of having what is just, that kind of body that is a quote unquote approved of society. And I think that it's to know, and I've chatted with other influencers and some other people that I follow on social media, and they've been shamed for similar things. And it just goes to show you again that they have thoughts and feelings and emotions too. And they're not just walking around, going, I have the perfect, like I have the perfect body. Everything's just like amazing. Like everyone has opportunities and experiences. So I think it's just at the end of the day, so important to like emphasize, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't assume and judge somebody because they look a certain way, because on the other end, you never know, and not you per se, but you never know all these women who are thin, what kind of starvation and plastic surgery and like extreme negative, unhealthy things they're doing to their body. And they loathe their bodies, but they feel as though it's the only thing that's going to get them through life the way that they want, but they're miserable.
Yeah. And I think too that, the shame and the judgment that those women get really only perpetuates that kind of mindset too. And, I'll acknowledge, like, I haven't been hyper aware of my body. And it's interesting actually, as I think about it, like those thoughts that even perhaps maybe someone who has a similar body type to me to be like, you know, I need to really maintain this. And like, this is me. And like, I love my body, and just being like so like attached to their body as a piece of their identity. Like my body has such a small part to do with my identity.
Yeah.
I am like so in my head all the time. And like the last thing that I'm in my head about is my body. Because for me, like my body is like a temple and it is my home.
Yeah.
And so I am like, I need to treat you with care and with love and be kind to you. I think I have different struggles with my body than what I think other people would think. Like my back, like I had scoliosis. And so I have 2 metal rods in my back that cause me to be super, super straight. And so I always have this posture that people think I'm like so uppity and like uptight because I'm like super straight posture. And that, I had to deal with a lot at a young age of like, how do I learn to not, hate my body because I had to have this like really invasive, like violating surgery to like change my body. Like that feels so weird. And feeling so insecure about my scar, and like never wanting to show that. And now it's like, it's a part of my story that I've had to come to a place of acceptance with and be, compassionate and loving towards. And that like, this is a part of what makes me me. And I don't want to hate me. And so I won't hate this scar. I will own it and I will treat it with compassion. And there's all kinds of other things too, but I think they would just slightly sound silly to even share, but everyone has their thing. And for the people that you might look at and idolize and think like, oh, they have like the perfect body, like they must just have like the most perfect life and be so happy with themselves. Like, no, take a step back and zoom out. Everyone has their shit.
Yeah, agreed. And I love the way that you just shared that about embracing that scar as being a part of your story. And I think if women can look at their own bodies and embrace whether it's stretch marks from having a child or losing weight, or it's certain scars from surgeries or freckles or birth marks, whatever it is, like each person on this earth is unique and it's such a gift to be here. So how can you become grateful for the body you have and the different marks and nicks and things that make you even more unique? And then, yes, you have a story to tell. I think that's so important. And that kind of brings me to my next question is for women who are struggling with body image, whatever side it is, and they are feeling insecure, maybe they are struggling with some form of like emotional eating or emotional relationship to any kind of a substance. Why is self-care such an important part of building confidence, wholeness, worthiness?
Self-care, I think, is crucial to building that self-love and that self-acceptance, because it allows you to actually take the time to quite literally take care of yourself. And you'd be hard pressed to find a person who accepts themselves and loves themselves and has not had to take care of themselves. And I don't think that that's just physically with eating well and exercising and those things that we know are like physically healthy for us, but that is so mentally and emotionally as well. Because those play a huge part in how we feel about those things like our body and our health. And I just think self-care or, nurturing yourself, taking care of yourself, however you want to say it, I think at the core of it, it's building your relationship with yourself. And like you said earlier, like we can get so fixated on other people and how they are the problem and how like, if they just did this, like this would all be better. And I definitely fall, victim to that sometimes too. But all that blame is just us discharging uncomfortable feelings that we have onto other people. And through like actual self-care, we look at what those uncomfortable feelings are and we work through them to a place where, we can love ourselves and be compassionate with ourselves through that. And I know I've said like compassion a lot throughout this. And I think it's important to look at like what self-compassion actually is, because I think it's a huge part of self-care, especially because there's twisted notions around self-care that it's selfish and that, you know, if you take that time to yourself, that you don't care about other people or that you're self-absorbed or whatever. And it's not the case. Self-compassion includes like literally being kind to yourself, like saying things like, yeah, you had a really hard day. That was hard. That was hard. Of having this like having this understanding of like common humanity, of like understanding that you're not alone. Other people struggle with this too.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay. Like, other people struggle with this too. And third is just mindfulness, like understanding and being like, you feel hurt right now. You're experiencing pain. This hurts. Just literally being like, yeah, this is sad. I'm sad right now. And so in being compassionate and doing that self-care of like, if I use the example of my scar, even of telling myself or writing this down or saying it out loud with a friend that, you know, this really hurts and this really changed my body in a way that I was really scared about. Like this really scared me. And I know other people struggle with scoliosis too. And I know that this is becoming more of a common surgery. And so it's nice to know that, you know, I'm not alone in this. And also that I can still be beautiful with this, that this can be a part of what makes me beautiful. And so even just saying that, like those few sentences, all that in and of itself is practicing and expressing self-compassion and doing that kind of a thing on a regular basis. In a way, it's like talking to yourself as if you were a friend, imagining yourself literally as a physical entity next to you, as like, that's your friend. It's like, talk to yourself. And that I think is a huge part of self-care that like is not commercialized and doesn't create profit and like isn't something that people necessarily look to do. But I think it's so at the core of getting to that place of self-love and self-acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you took that time to acknowledge the hurt or today was hard, like you're giving yourself permission to feel, which yes, it can be scary and vulnerable, but it helps you with the healing process. And once you start to do it, you realize the world's not going to end if I feel fear or worry or whatever it is. And I love, you know, that self-compassion, pretend you're sitting beside yourself on the couch and have a conversation. I think it's so important that people stop to take some time to feel and work through this rather than just, again, going on their day, not taking the time. And then people end up overwhelmed, burnt out, and really unhappy. And I think that just fuels the projection and or kind of dumping on others.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you pointed out, you know, like how it can be uncomfortable. And I think that that's a large reason why we do put things off and we just keep going and keep going and keep going. But I always say, and even I always say, and even when I always say, I still always mess it up. I'm like, I should have this like down by now, but I always like to remind myself, like, don't avoid this temporary discomfort, because it will only result in like long-term like pain and angst, and like it will make things worse essentially. And so to understand that the discomfort is temporary and that it is going to be so much easier for you to work through that and to address it and feel it and heal it when it comes up, than to like just shove it all the way down, because then it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And then it's a huge thing that you have to sit with that is just immensely not even uncomfortable at this point. It is like painful and it is scary and it is overwhelming. And so, when you do practice self-compassion, you do have to sit with that pain. That is literally compassion with yourself. And it's worth it. It's worth it to do it.
100%. And I love again that you acknowledge that there's going to be the discomfort, and that by working through it, it's actually going to be easier. Cause it's so true. Cause how many times have you been like, oh, I just don't want to deal with this, but I'm going to do it. And then you're like, thank God, or wow, the outcome was really great. And no, I just feel so much lighter. Again, we can get so caught up in our heads, talk ourselves out of it. But then it's like, what does it cost you to not, or how does that impact other people who may be involved? Right. So thank you for acknowledging that, because I think it's so important to acknowledge the discomfort, but to work through it. And something I heard last night when I was watching a show, there was an entrepreneur and he was talking about, the more I embrace discomfort and go through it, I can handle taking it on when it comes on. It does get a bit easier. So perhaps unique scenario has its own level of discomfort, but I know the benefits. So therefore, it's almost like you build this muscle of being willing to go to that space.
Yeah. It's literally like neuroplasticity, like our brain becoming, our brain is so resilient when we start to build these patterns and make things, a regular routine of leaning into that discomfort when it happens. It totally does get easier. And, if you say you have this one bathing suit that every time you put this bathing suit on, you're met with all these like negative thoughts about yourself. And instead you just throw your cover up on and then you're just like, oh, okay, I just need to go. That's still you didn't just leave that right there. Like you're carrying that with you and it's building up to then when you get to the beach and then you're like, do I take my cover up off? I don't want to take my cover up off, but everyone else has their cover up off. Like, ugh. All these thoughts. Like if you take that 5 minutes to sit with yourself in the mirror with that bathing suit on that you don't like and sit in that discomfort, it might still be a work in progress. I'm not saying it's going to be healed in 5 minutes, but that's a step towards it. That's a step towards acknowledging it and being kind to yourself in it. And I mean, for me, anytime I practice my self-compassion, I'm usually sharing it with a friend, sharing it with someone who I trust and who I know loves me and who I know will support me and is on board with my journey of self-growth.
Yeah.
And so I think it can be important to surround yourself with people like that so that as you do that kind of work, you can share it and actively practice it and have people to like help hold you accountable.
Yeah. 100%. I totally agree. And I love that even just taking that 5 minutes, it is a work in progress. And you get to that point where you'll be able to fully enjoy your present moment because you've done that inner work. Right. Yeah. So is there any other wisdom that you would like to share? Anything else you would like to touch on today with the listeners?
I don't know. I mean, I think the two things I repeated the most today were about intention and self-compassion. And they're two things that I struggle with and that I try to work on a daily basis. And I guess I would just honestly want to encourage people, to really focus on those two things, on intention and self-compassion. And even so much of the work I do with clients, like we are so freaking hard on ourselves and we are so mean to ourselves, being so negative.
Yeah.
And I really think that work of self-compassion is so important. There's literally a book called Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff, who was amazing. And she has so many different exercises on self-compassion that people can check out. And I would also highly recommend reading some Brene Brown, who's like the world's leading researcher in vulnerability and shame. Yes. She has some TED Talks as well that are really great. And her book, The Gifts of Imperfection and Daring Greatly, have literally changed my life. And I think through both self-compassion and intention, there's layers of vulnerability there. And a lot of her work also, involves this notion of feeling like we're not good enough at anything and feeling like we'll only be good if, like, I'll be worthy when I lose 10 pounds. I'll be worthy when I get this promotion, all these different things. That I think play a part in what we were talking about. So I would definitely recommend her as a resource. And then, if people want to hear me talk about more things, then they can definitely find me both on Instagram at Taymocha, which is TAYMOCHA. And then also my podcast where I talk about things very similar to this, and also can hear more of Amber's story on there too, which is Let's Talk About It with Taylor Nolan. If you just put in Taylor Nolan, you'll see it pop up.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll be sure to put that information in the show notes as well so that people can easily find you. Thank you so much for being on the show today and just sharing openly and vulnerably and having a wonderful exploration. I hope everybody has enjoyed the show today, and I will look forward to sharing a whole new podcast with you guys next week.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So thank you everyone for tuning in. The show notes for today's episode can be found at amberapproved.ca/podcast/201. A friendly reminder to subscribe to the podcast on all podcast apps. You can click the link in the show notes. Be sure to also, check out the new website at amberapproved.ca. Take the emotional eating quiz there. The link for that as well will be in the show notes. If you have questions yourself about your health journey, you can email them to info@amberapproved.ca. I just ask the questions are no more than 150 words in length, as private coaching may be a better fit. If you have questions or suggestions or feedback about the podcast or topics you'd like to see me explore, feel free again to email those at info@amberapproved.ca. Last but not least, if you are wanting to start to overcome your food cravings, start to understand what triggers you to emotionally eat, slow down your schedule, reduce that belly bloat, and build a healthier relationship with food in your body, then you're definitely going to want to see if the Jump into Your Body group program for fall is a good fit for you. Enrollment has been well underway, and there's still one spot left for the 50% off savings. So make sure that you email me at info@amberapproved.ca with the subject line Fall Group Program to book a complimentary consultation with me. We can talk more about your health goals and concerns and where you're seeking support. And I can share the information with you about the group program, the pricing, and we can see if it's a good fit to have you become enrolled. Have a beautiful day, a great weekend. And remember, there is no better time than the present to take action on your health. So take action now. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe, review, and rate this podcast and share it with your friends. You can find me at amberapproved.ca and follow me on Instagram and YouTube at Amber Romaniuk. Join me next Sunday for another brand new episode and another step toward body freedom.